And welcome to the Research Works podcast, brought to you in association with Curtin University and the Healthy Strides Foundation. Your hosts are Dr. Dana Poole and Dr. Ashley Thornton, and together we will interview world-leading researchers in the area of child health to support your practice in being more evidence-based.
The team at the Research Works podcast acknowledges the traditional custodians of the land and waters on which we live and work. We pay our respects to all First Nations peoples, elders past and present, and would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we record this podcast each week, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation. We recognise their continued connection to this beautiful budja we call home.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to a brand new season 4 of the Research Works podcast.
Oh, welcome back, everyone. We hope you had a great festive season and new year. As you can tell by our voices, we're feeling very relaxed.
Yes. On a bit of a high.
Festive. We're thrilled to be back for a new season of Research Works, season 4.
Crazy.
Which is pretty incredible.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us, to all our new listeners and listeners who've been with us for all 4 seasons. It's really exciting.
Yeah, thank you.
And to kick off this new season, we have the honour of having Professor Catherine Elliott in the studio today. Welcome and thank you for joining us, Kath.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. As you both know, I'm a huge fan of Research Works podcast, and I have been a long-time listener for all 4 episodes, so I'm thrilled to be here. So thank you for having me.
Thanks, Kath.
So good to have you in the studio. Yeah. We actually had you on the show back in the first season when you helped us with an interview, which was brilliant because Ash, you were having a baby at the time, I believe.
Yes.
So it's nice to have you on the other end because I think it's going to be so valuable to chat with you today. It's an amazing season opener because I think your wealth of experience is going to be something that will help set the tone for the year for many of our listeners and for us as well.
Yeah, I think so. We've actually titled this episode Building a Clinical Researcher's Career, Lessons from a Mentor. And I think, Kath has been a wonderful mentor to both of us. Indeed. And we hope to share some of Kath's insights into a clinical researcher's career with you all today. Because, Kath, you're someone who's essentially done it all. Clinician, PhD supervision, clinical research. You've done it all.
I think that's so kind and generous of you both, and I'm so happy to be here. And I just also, want to acknowledge all the mentors and support that I have had over many, many years. And, we always... It's, for those people that we are here. And so I'm really excited to talk about this today and see where we go.
It's the perfect topic.
Absolutely.
Yep. We should tell everyone about Kath, though.
We definitely
know
should.
Her well, but everyone else?
There is lots to tell about Professor Catherine Elliott.
This is awkward. Sorry, Kath. Here we go.
Sorry, Kath. Professor Catherine Elliott has always been passionate about improving the outcomes for babies and children who have neurological impairment. After working as a senior occupational therapist at Perth Children's Hospital for more than a decade, she became curious about the evidence behind the interventions delivered to children and successfully transitioned from a career in clinical care to clinical research. Professor Elliott invests her time in 2 main areas of research: supporting clinicians to use the latest science in their clinical practice to improve outcomes for children and their families, and developing new evidence-based treatments to improve functioning for children with cerebral palsy and other neurological conditions. She maintains a strong belief in actively engaging consumers in all aspects of her research work so that their lived experience guides the research process. She's a chief investigator on over 6 NH&MRC clinical trials and cohort studies and 1 NH&MRC Centre of Research Excellence in the area of cerebral palsy, as well as supervising and mentoring a large number of postdoctoral students, doctoral students, staff and researchers. Currently, Professor Elliott is the Director of Research at Telethon Kids Institute, as well as the Chair of Kids Rehab at the Child and Adolescent Health Service, a Professor in the School of Allied Health at Curtin University, and the Chair of, this is a very long title, the Inaugural Science in Australia Gender Equality Athena Swan Australia Advisory Committee.
Thanks,
very impressive. I didn't feel like there was anything we could leave out of that because I feel like it's all very relevant to what we're going to cover with you today, Kath, but what an impressive career.
Thank you. Awkward and embarrassing, but thank you for sharing that with everybody.
But I think the most impressive thing about it is that you balance all of that out with, you know, time for your family, time for things outside of work as well. And so that's something that we're really keen to cover with you today, and, you know, how we kind of keep everything in balance.
Yeah. Really looking forward to it today. But before we get into all of that, now that we've given the very professional bio, we have a less professional bio.
Totally.
But it's kind of part of it, right?
This is all part of the getting to know you process at ResearchWorks. As our icebreaker question, Kath, today's question: what was your first ever job, and what did you love/hate about it?
I love that question. So I would have been in year 3, and my first ever job was at the local fabric shop, and I used to have to refold the fabric so it looked tidy on the shelf.
Oh, wow.
And my favourite bit of the job was I would go and get cakes from the shop for all the staff straight after school. And for me, that was so wonderful because I was living in a family where they were prettykin. So there was no sugar, no fat, no taste. And so once a week I would be able to go to the little bakery and choose little sweet treats, and it was the highlight of my week.
And was that the motivation for taking the job?
Oh, completely. Shameless. Definitely. It was all about the cake.
Yeah.
So young.
I think I got paid all of 20 cents as well.
Yes, of course.
But I got the cake and it was
Yeah.
just, loved it. I think I hit my pinnacle of my career there.
I love that. That's actually really similar. I mean, I love that you've gone down the food path for that as well. So my first job, I worked at a bakery, got paid $6.23 an hour, which I thought was the bee's knees. And I remember working for 10 hours. The first time I worked for 10 hours on a Saturday, I remember my back being really sore. Like I've never stood for so long before. That was really tough. But the best part was the end of the day, things that were left over. And I went overboard. I would get bags upon bags of just bread, sweets, pastries. That was a great thing, but also a really bad thing because I had no boundaries. I wasn't limited.
No limits.
That's right. So that was the best thing about it. But getting paid, you know, first time you can earn a bit of money. I bought myself a little stereo, a 5-deck CD, you know, that spins.
Yes.
And you can pick the ones, and then there was like 2 cassettes, so you could like
Record.
Yeah. I've
So
still got it
cool,
in my
Dana.
garage. I can't throw it away. I can't use it anymore, but it's like pretty cool.
Yeah.
I'm having flashbacks now to when I used to be able to record on cassettes, and you used to wait by the stereo for your favourite song to come on the radio so you could quickly hit record.
Play and record. Make sure you do both of them at the same time. Yeah.
A mixtape.
Mixtape.
I love a mixtape.
Kids, if you don't know what that is, I would highly recommend you talk to someone a little bit older than you because they were the best.
We're showing our age.
So great.
Yeah.
Ash, what about you?
Oh, my first job was very different. It was not, or somewhat food related, but my granddad had horses, and so my first job was shoveling poo out of the horse stables, and I thought it was the best job ever. I loved getting to I loved getting to hang out with my granddad and spending time with the horses and doing the wheelbarrow and putting it on the pile. And
so you weren't even fussed about that, but it's the fact that you're around your granddad and horses. That's cool.
And there's something good about being able to like move your body.
Yeah.
How old are you?
Oh, I think I was about 12. And I carried on for quite some time.
Yeah, that's really good. These are things that make you, though.
That's right.
You know, just a bit of hard work.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love it.
It was very rewarding.
Good question. Really good question. I really like it. Well, now that we've gone through our first jobs, which I didn't know that about either of you.
And the spectrum of food to poo.
Let's be honest. Yeah, that's right. Let's get into this conversation.
Let's do it. Let's take a sharp left turn and talk about
That's right.
careers.
There's no segue here. Go for it.
All right. So, Kath, there's so much we want to talk to you about today, but I think a good place to start would be where you started with your clinical career, and I suppose what kinds of things you were doing as a clinical occupational therapist and how that has led to where you are now.
Okay. So I was working as an occupational therapist with children with cerebral palsy, and I'd worked for quite a few years. And I was finding that sometimes what I was doing as far as interventions go were really not making the difference that I'd hoped. And, like all therapists, you sort of, track what's happening and you sort of assess and really we weren't getting the change that children and families wanted. And so I started to get really curious about the different types of intervention, and I went off and did a lot of different training in lots of different modalities, which now I know are not necessarily evidence-based, but I did them all to try and, bring them back to families and see what's making a difference. So really it was just that search to try and find interventions for children with cerebral palsy. And it really sort of happened by accident because I started off doing like a quality assurance project.
Okay.
We call them geckos at work, just to, see, if it works. But to actually answer the question, I had to learn about different types of assessments. I had to actually learn and understand the intervention in far more detail.
Yeah.
So before I knew it, my quality assurance project just grew and grew into a master's, which then grew into a PhD. So it was completely by accident that I ended up, being in this really privileged position to be able to do clinical research. So it wasn't a plan.
But I think sometimes that's the best part about it, because I think it's very rare that there's not many people I know who are clinicians that just go, I just want to do a PhD. There's usually something that sort of spurs that thought.
That curiosity.
Yeah. I didn't even know that there was such a thing as PhD for allied health. I just thought it was something that you did as a basic scientist. So I was really surprised when I connected with the university to understand about the assessments that I wanted to do, that there were all these options that I could do a master's, I could do even just an individual unit to learn more about statistics. I had no idea.
Wow. And what was the stimulus for that, Kath? Was did someone kind of tap you on the shoulder and say, hey, you're doing all of this work, that actually is something that could make up a research degree? Or did you, in your kind of quest to solve this curious question that you had, you kind of stumbled across it?
Yeah, it was completely by accident. I just kept badgering people to say, hey, I really want to understand how this intervention works. How could I assess it? And I ended up talking to people who are really great at assessment and, they're from a different discipline, which is, what I think makes great research, when you actually get lots of people from different disciplines coming together to answer the question. So I was just really lucky that and very grateful for the people who actually listened to me, took my calls and entertained the thought of actually doing this, assessments and evaluation and working with the children and families.
Wow.
So, it was just really wanting to know the answer to something.
And just following the leads and that's what took you to that place.
Yeah.
Well, I guess that leads to my next question really nicely for people who are sort of clinicians who want to become more evidence-based, they have more questions. What wisdom do you have to impart into those who are wanting to engage more in research? What are some of those first steps that they can take?
I think there's lots of different ways to engage in research. I think one way where you would have an opportunity to learn a huge amount is actually by being part of a research team.
Yes.
And everybody in the research team plays a really important role. And one role that's often it's absolutely fundamental to the running of all studies are your clinical assessors and also your clinicians delivering the intervention to fidelity. So just, having the exposure and the experience of being part of a big research team, you can start to learn about how the research is done. You can you have immediate mentors and supporters around you, and you can really get a taste of what it's like to do research. So I think, being part of a big research team is a great way to get involved in research, and it doesn't need to be where you're working. Like a lot of the, big research projects will even just employ people, sort of half a day a week or 1 day a week to do some of those assessments and interventions, which allied health clinicians are incredibly skilled at doing. So I think that's one way to get some exposure.
Yeah.
I think another way is in, I guess the way I sort of started with a quality assurance project. So actually starting small and looking at something that's a really important clinical question to you as a clinician and also to families, because when you're working with children and families so closely, you're the ones who know the most important questions when you work with families. And so you're in the perfect position. Also, if you're working with organisations that collect good data safely, you have opportunities to use that. And I guess that's part of being part of a bigger research team. It's really hard to set up your own project from scratch, get the ethics, recruit the patients. But if, a big research team's doing that already and you feel that you can support them by, analysing their data in a certain way or even just adding on to their study, it's a great way to get involved in research. I think just one more, is another great way is actually becoming a supervisor, for example, of an honours student. In all of our research teams, we would have a clinical supervisor who brings huge depth of experience in clinical land and understands, the patients and understands the, assessments and intervention. And so they are such an integral part of a supervision team. So you have in your team a mixture of academics and clinicians, and by being part of that team you learn a lot more about the research process, but you also get the opportunity to develop your track record. And I think I just want to touch on that because that's one of the hardest things about getting into research, is that a lot of the scholarships and fellowships that are open require you to have a track record. And by track record, I mean you might have to have published a paper, presented at a conference, supported, mentored people in research. And by being part of the bigger research teams or also by supervising students, you can develop your own track record, and then you would also be competitive when you're applying for some of those fellowships.
That's wonderful advice.
Oh my gosh, that is so good.
I feel like, that being involved in a research project as a clinician, not only are you developing your research skills, but it also helps you develop your clinical skills as well, right? Like often you'll be getting trained in a particular assessment or intervention. Perhaps it's something that you haven't had experience with before, so that's something that you get to add to your CV, but also you get to take those kind of critical research skills and apply them to your clinical work.
That's right. Yeah, and Ash, I think that's so important for knowledge translation. And, the best research is actually done in the clinic. And because you actually have the clinicians who are delivering the intervention and doing the assessment. So it means that, after the research project finishes, if it's shown to be of value, that the clinicians can keep doing the amazing work that they're doing. So I think, knowledge translation is just key.
Absolutely.
I love how you've brought that into it. And I think the key thing to me, when I hear that, is for clinicians as well, and being really robust with your assessments, because it is a little bit different to your clinical practice where you're kind of, wanting to see your pre's and your posts and understand what's happening clinically. But when you add the research lens to it, you're so much more intentional. You're so much more pointed about what it is that you're doing. And already there you learn those skills about, bias and how you can, why blinding is really important, all the different aspects of research. That's right. I think all that comes into play.
Just on that note, I think that having a growth mindset is so important to embark upon this journey because, you will be asked to do things possibly differently. You will also have people reviewing what you're doing. So if you're doing an assessment, you might have multiple people watch it and score it. So I think it's, wanting to grow and then wanting to make sure that you can, as a clinician, as you grow in your skills, you can also deliver that and, really benefit lots of children.
That's such a fantastic point. So, Kath, the next thing we wanted to talk to you about is, I suppose, once you're in a career in research, I suppose the next step naturally is to start to develop those leadership skills, and you move from being a part of a team to potentially leading a team. And often I think when we think about leadership, we think about leaving that to people in positions of authority. But we know that, throughout the whole span of our career, there's a call at times to be a leader or to take a leadership position in what we're doing. So can you talk to us about how you view leadership in, I suppose, the clinical and the research contexts?
Yeah, I think that's so important. I think in both of those contexts, we have many leaders in very many different ways. And I think if you really think about what leadership is, it's really having a goal or a strategy and supporting and bringing everybody along so that as a team or a group you achieve that goal. So that definitely doesn't need to be your CEO. And when I talk to people who are involved in research, it's often, and clinicians, it's actually their team that's the most important. And it's, the goal of the team, which obviously links into the corporate strategy. And it's making sure that everybody is being the best that they can be to deliver on that goal.
Yeah.
So I think being a leader is all about developing people so that they can be the best that they can be and all work together to achieve that goal.
Yeah.
And I think that over the last sort of 10 or 15 years, the way we view leadership has changed. And there are a lot, for me, there are many, many fabulous mentors that I feel are authentic and are the leaders that I would like to be. So, that's probably...
I like that.
Yeah. And so do you have any, I suppose, advice or lessons learned about how you can start to increase your influence as a leader or as someone who feels like maybe they're starting to take on a bit more of a leadership role, whether it's formally or informally?
Yeah, I think one thing that I've learnt over the years, and it's taken me a long time to learn this, is one of the most important things about being a leader is actually having those difficult conversations. And being incredibly clear in your communication and being incredibly compassionate in your communication. And I think that if you don't have those really difficult conversations, that leads to a number of problems, including, poor behaviour, often increasing, not decreasing. People's job satisfaction reduces, and obviously people's output also reduces. But also by having those, really difficult conversations, you can support people to be the leaders that they need to be in the space that's ready for them. So I think that, as a leader, you need to really develop your team, and that's part of developing the team.
I love that. I think when you said that it's been that shift of what leadership is, we've often always thought about leadership being positions within an organisation, position of management. But I love how you've steered it into the really modern way of thinking about, authentic leadership. It's not just about the position that you hold, but it's building your team. Because ultimately when you build your team, you build the capacity of the entire team, and then your impact is far greater. But I love that you talked about difficult conversations too, because we don't talk about difficult conversations a lot, but you're right. It absolutely impacts job satisfaction, the potential output from your team too. So as a leader, if you're avoiding those conversations, that has such an impact across the entire team in a way that really does come down to you to be able to have those conversations. Such a good one.
Yeah.
They're hard.
And I think... And I think back to, all the times we've talked about communication on this podcast and how important communication is. And often we talk about it in the context of, communication with families or people that we're working with in a clinical or a research sense, either as, patients or participants. But that communication piece is just as important within the team as well, isn't it?
Oh, completely. And I think over the years, you see the pitfalls of this not being done well. And I think there's a number of, other pitfalls that leaders can fall into when we're reflecting on that. And I think one thing that I've learned over the years is actually ignoring diversity and inclusion is a massive pitfall for leaders. So not creating the team. And there's a lot of different ways we need to look at diversity, inclusivity, and the intersectionality of that. So I think that that's something that you often see leaders not considering and can actually have a huge impact on the team's success in delivering their goals.
Yeah. And sort of part of that as well when you're wanting to build that team, because that's what it is, isn't it? You're building the team not in terms of just the numbers and the positions that are within that, the skill sets that are within that, the communication skills within that. Can I dive into that area of difficult conversations again? Because I feel like that's part of all of that really. Is how do you even start them?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Because I think you want to be I love how you said you want to be clear, you want to be compassionate about it, but sometimes it's even starting to have that conversation or when to have that conversation. What are your pearls of wisdom there, Professor?
So I think what I've learned is when is sooner rather than later.
Sure.
So I think the earliest. I also think now's a good time to talk about the culture of the team.
Yeah.
So if it's a cultural norm within your team that you do have those difficult conversations and it's seen as courageous having that honesty, then you've set up the environment for having those conversations regularly.
It's not out of the blue.
No.
Yeah.
I also think aligning those conversations with the values of your organisation and your team and really looking at the values in terms of the behaviour that you expect and that you would see.
Yeah.
I think one fundamental thing, though, for a courageous conversation is actually having developed trust. And that's trust within your team. It's very hard to have a difficult conversation if there is a lack of trust and a lack of psychological safety. So I think that to have those conversations, you do need to address particularly psychological safety, within the team, within the organisation as well. I think the way a lot of organisations are structured is you do have time where you do give regular feedback. It's really important that it's not the only time that feedback is given. It should be given in a regular and consistent way, and it should be very productive and very clear. So I think there's a lot of things at an organisational level you can put in. But it's really about having those conversations early. I think the other thing is when you're having those conversations as a leader, they're often the ones that we think about the night before that we know we've got to have. And it's making sure that you're also prepared for that conversation, that, you're ready for that conversation. You've had a good sleep the night before. You've got time, so you're not racing from one meeting to the next. You actually dedicate the time. That you do a check-in with yourself to make sure that you're in a good place to deliver that message.
Such a good point.
So I think there's a lot that you can do as a leader to make sure that you have a successful, difficult conversation as well. And then obviously it's the follow-up. It's never just the one conversation.
And I think that's such a good point. That relates to any aspect of a workplace really, but also from the perspective of performance within the team, clinically, within a research context, because we all have milestones that we need to be able to hit as well, and sometimes that you do need that push along of what you need to be able to achieve together. It's a good one. But I like how you called it a courageous conversation.
Yes. And the things that I've taken away from what you said there, Kath, and just reflecting on my own experiences as well, it's the early conversation is having it early makes it infinitely less difficult. I think about, things that you let fester for weeks, months, years sometimes, that's a huge conversation to try and have with people or a person. Whereas if you're addressing things as they come up, then you are mitigating some of that difficulty.
Yeah, and I think it's kind to have those conversations early. And I can think about some of the really difficult ones that I've had. And it might be about, somebody's in the wrong career. It might be they have amazing skills in data and management, but they might not, have the skills that they need to do their current job.
Yeah.
And it's not kind to leave that conversation for years,
Such a good point.
so that they can actually, put them on the right track, support them. But it's a very difficult conversation. I think the other thing is listening as well when someone's having a difficult conversation with you. So I think as leaders, we need to be really, really receptive of that, because it's obviously even more difficult due to the power imbalance for our staff to have those conversations with us.
Yeah.
And I think we also need to create the opportunity and, again, the culture that our staff feel that they can safely and, bring those things to us so that we can be the leaders that we need to be. So we do need to create that space. It's not just us as leaders, feeding back to our staff and providing feedback. It's making sure that we're accountable and we take on the feedback as well and provide opportunities for that.
Yeah. And how can you set the tone for that? Because I think that's often that the other, being able to feedback, that feedback loop is so important. But to set that as even a possibility, I can imagine culturally, there'll be those aspects too where there's a very power imbalance, how could you? What are some of the things or words, phrases you can use to help set the tone to say that's okay?
Yeah, so one of my bosses recently, he actually just was very clear with me and said, Kath, actually in your role as Executive Deputy Director, you need to feed back to me. You need to actually, provide, feedback on, what's going well, what's not going well. So I think just being open and direct is the easiest. And then the other thing is making sure that when someone does feedback, that you are receptive to it and that you also give them time to do it as well.
Sure.
So I think those things have really enabled me to feed up and encouraged me to do that. So I think just having a really open conversation and really welcoming and encouraging your team to do that. And obviously modelling.
Yeah.
So, you modelling how you have the conversations, with them will hopefully give them the framework to have that conversation with you. I also think something that's really important is we don't have to do this alone. So I think that, for conversations that are difficult, it's important that, we look at the support of our mentors. We also get, if we're lucky enough to access, some professional coaching or support, we also do have our services. A lot of organisations have free employment services as well that you can access. So I think it's important to know that you're not doing this alone and to, make the most of the support network around you.
Yeah.
I think those are all such great points. And I think at the end of the day, whether you're pursuing a career in this area or any other area, and I love how you said it's having a kind conversation, because ultimately if people are where they are, that they feel where their values align with what they're doing, everyone's really happy and left really fulfilled.
I was just thinking about that, like having the conversation is difficult, but it's more difficult to behave in a way that goes against your own personal values of being kind and authentic and honest. So actually, while the conversation itself is difficult, the feeling that you have afterwards is better than holding on to all of the things that you might be in avoiding that conversation.
Yeah, and I think going back to you're not doing it alone, the person you are having that conversation with, as a leader, you need to make sure you then scaffold support around them so that they can be the best that they can be. So you need to be part and work with them on the solutions. So it's not just the difficult conversation. You need to then work on the solutions with them and then work with them regularly to give them very clear feedback how it's going.
Yeah.
It's great.
Yeah.
So many practical tips there.
Definitely.
I like that. Yeah.
One of the other things that I think people in positions of leadership, but I think all of us, at some point in our careers have to deal with is burnout. And I think it's not something that historically has been acknowledged very well. And there's, potentially been some, I suppose there's a culture of just kind of getting on with it and wanting to be seen as a hard worker and diligent and all of those things. But I feel like probably to do with COVID and all the lockdowns and really having to sit back and reflect on work-life balance has caused these conversations to come out in the open a little bit more. So we know it's not isolated just to clinicians and researchers. It's a topic that's kind of universal. Yeah. But in your experience, I'd love to hear your advice for people on how to avoid burnout.
Wow, I think I'm so excited we're discussing this because I think one of the most important things to avoid burnout is actually the awareness. So by having, this conversation today, I'm hoping that people can have a think and, a reflection. So I think the awareness is absolutely fundamental. And we also know with burnout, catching it early is really important. And as a leader, we are responsible and need to be incredibly mindful of the health and well-being of our teams. And so I think this conversation about burnout is really, really important. And I think that there's a lot from an organisational level that can be done, but I also think that from an individual level, there is a lot that can be done as well. And I think that some of these things are not complicated. But I think before we go into that, it's really important that if people are thinking that they're experiencing burnout, I'd really encourage them to talk to their GP and obviously get professional support. And there's also a lot of different support numbers that they can call, including their own EAP as well, because burnout can also obviously can present in different ways. And so people do need to get their support. But I think if you feel like you're in the early stages of burnout, it's looking for signs like, you're not enjoying things anymore, you're not connecting with people, you're not sleeping, you're emotionally exhausted. And I think by starting to look at those signs, you can start to put things in early. And I think there's one thing that I do, like everybody, it's something that I'm really aware of, being, I think Ashley mentioned, mum, I've got 2 boys, managing life, parents, dog, working, like a lot of clinical academics in multiple roles. It's a lot. And so there's a few things that I've put in place in my own life that I find really help. The one thing for me that's really important is for every day, just do one thing for myself. So that one thing is often just so small and so tiny. It might be sitting in the sun with my cup of tea for a minute. It might be reading 4 pages of my book. It might be watching a silly YouTube clip. But I just think every day doing something for yourself, so not for work, not for family, not for the community, just having that one moment. But Ash, I'm reflecting on what you were saying after COVID, the change. And I listened to this incredible lecture last week by Professor Helen Milroy, who is from Telethon Kids, and she is an Indigenous psychiatrist, and she talked about permacrisis, which is really the state that she felt the world is in after COVID, moving from one crisis to the next. And in her presentation, she really captured some very practical solutions based on our First Nations people. And as we know, they're the longest surviving people in the world. And a lot of it is about going back to basics. It's about connecting with your community, connecting with country, connecting with traditions, and also going back to basics of nature. So I think that, if people are at sort of early stages of burnout, remembering those basics is absolutely fundamental. But I also think that if, people are in, the later stages of burnout, you really need to get professional help. And as leaders, we need to recognise that and encourage our staff to get the support and the help that they need.
Yeah. And I think one of the characteristics of a really good leader is modelling that behaviour as well, like recognising it in themselves, or giving themselves the space away from work to do other things and to be other things besides who they are in their career. I think that's such an important part of it as well, is that culture you build within your team and how you model that to your team.
Ash, I think that's so important. I took an annual leave day on Monday to take my mum shopping, and I just emailed round my executive team and then research team say, I'm taking the day off, I'm taking my mum shopping. And I did. I got lots of great feedback, and I hope other people will also take their leave and take their holidays and use it to really help them fill up their cup. So I agree completely. And, I've had some great mentors in my life that have done that. I think taking holidays is absolutely fundamental, and then not working on your holidays as well.
Yes. Because I think there's a difference, isn't there? There's the being heroic and trying to push through and demonstrating to everyone like your role, your responsibilities, and you're committed. And there are times for sure, like, we've all been part of writing a paper or a grant, and it just needs a bit of grunt work.
Sometimes there's a deadline and you can't avoid that.
Right?
Yeah.
So you do them. And I think we had a chat with the lovely Stuart Trost from Queensland last year, and he was talking about thinking about what do you call it on the cars when you rev your car? You rev it into the red zone. And sometimes you do rev it into the red zone when you've got something due, but you can't stay there for too long because you'll burn out the car.
Yeah.
So you'll do it every now and then to get through a little phase, but make sure you come back down again to re-energize and look after the car.
Yes.
And I thought that was such a great analogy. There are times where you do need to push, as long as you know that for the rest of the time you come back and you make sure that there is that balance. The every now and then moments.
Yeah, and I also think as leaders we really need to be mindful of our team's workload.
Yes.
And we need to, it's our responsibility to manage that workload and to make sure, for example, that all the deadlines are not at once and that, that there are sort of space and time. So I think that's a really important job of leaders.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah.
One last little thing I thought I'd bring in before Ed has his moment for the beginning of the season is maybe a little thing for early career researchers, because I feel like that's such an area where you've mentored, particularly myself, Ash. We've all gone through. You've got the structure of the PhD, which is structure and it's brilliant, but you come out of PhD land to this unknown wilderness of early career researcher and you suddenly you feel like you've got to make your way in the world. What's your wisdom there that you can impart to those guys? Because I feel like that's a big part of identity as a researcher.
It is. Right? It's also the most difficult time as a researcher, that time when you finished your PhD and you're looking for the next thing. And I think it's difficult because there's so many exciting options and so many different things that you can do. But it's also working out what those options are best for you and where you want to take your career.
Yeah.
So I think and also I think it's really important to acknowledge that we actually lose a lot of people from the research pipeline at the early career research stage.
Okay.
It's often when people are juggling family commitments, caring for parents. They also have busy clinical caseloads as well, and they're often the senior clinicians within their team. So it's a time in their life when everything is happening at once.
Wow, yeah.
And so I think what I found for me that was most useful was having some mentors.
Yeah.
Both peer mentors, so people who you go through your PhD with who are, working and trying to work this out as well. Yeah. So I think continuing with that peer mentoring network.
Sure.
But I also think getting mentors who are separate from your PhD supervisors. Your PhD supervisors will always be there. They will want you to succeed and be there for you. But you need to start to have people around you who will champion you. So, for example, if someone's putting in a grant, they will say, actually, I think you really need to consider, Dana Poole for this grant. She is a leading expert in exercise. I suggest you put her on the grant. So you need to have different types of mentors. You also, at that point, really need people who will sponsor you.
Sure.
And by sponsorship, it might be actually they're going to put you on their grant or include you in a big research project. So they will really sponsor you and help your career to grow. As well as, obviously mentors to help you navigate the incredible opportunities you'll have after doing a PhD to make sure what's the best thing for you. Yeah. So I think it's getting that support around you and getting some really good advice.
Yeah. Yeah.
But also knowing, like for all of us, it's a great time when it always is to make mistakes and to try things and to give things a go that you might not have. Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
So good.
It is.
I really enjoyed that.
Yeah.
What a great way to start the year and to frame what 2024 can look like, and from a great sense of optimism. I think it's really fantastic.
And, some really practical advice, Kath, for all of the clinicians who might be thinking about research or researchers who might be feeling, a little bit burnt out or lost at the moment. I think there's some, really great signposts in there for them to take away from this chat.
Good.
So thank you.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been a huge privilege. I love this podcast. So to be on it is just so exciting. So thank you.
Thank you. Well, we're not done yet, so hold tight. Ready? Here we go. Ed, as you know, is our producer. He doesn't have a background in child health, but he has been listening to this entire episode, and we have not prepped him for any of this. So, Ed, welcome back to the show. Welcome back to 2024. And you have time for a question for the professor.
Oh, wow. I didn't even get a 60-second pitch.
No, I don't think we needed to for this one. I thought about it, and I changed my line.
Captain's call.
That's right.
I will abide by that.
Okay, all right.
So this has been a fantastic episode. I've loved, obviously, hearing about someone talk about their incredible experience in this field. And I guess it's been enlightening for me kind of figuring out what researchers do, how that kind of integrates with clinical work. So my question is about, I know Professor Elliott, Kath, referred to kind of stumbling into this area. But I imagine that researchers in general obviously are kind of made up in such a way that they want to make an impact on the world. So ultimately the output of like this research work and why you do what you do is to make a difference. And I'm going to go on a slight tech tangent because I'm a tech guy.
Going that way. Oh gosh. Hold on to your horses.
my question is around knowledge translation and how that kind of fits in with researchers as an end goal, and how things kind of become more accessible and how much responsibility people kind of have, or whether that's a particular focus of the research career, because obviously trying to do a Google search on something, you don't get access to articles because it can't scan through that information. And now we have, generative AI where they're scouring the internet for lots of information and they won't necessarily get to research articles and publications unless they're open access. So how much responsibility, or is that an element of a researcher's career that needs to be thought of in some way?
Oh, that is a fantastic question. It is it is the responsibility of the researcher. There is no doubt. There is an ethical and a moral responsibility that if you are asking people to be part of your team, and children, including children and families, that you share that knowledge. So that should be part of the very, very beginning stage. So when you're actually designing a research question, you need to make sure that you engage with all of the stakeholders, so children's families, policymakers, managers, clinicians, to ensure that the research that you're doing is actually important to the community. It's actually feasible, but also it will have the impact and can be translated into the clinical services, can be translated into policy and practice. So the best research actually starts to develop the knowledge translation plan at the very beginning. And that plan is developed in partnership with all of the key stakeholders.
Yeah. So good. I love that. And I think I've learnt that from you.
Absolutely.
But it is so important to be thinking about that all the way along. And Ed, not bad. That's pretty good.
Yeah, thank you. I thought long and hard about that question.
I love it.
Testament to all you've learnt across
That's
our
right. I'm feeling
that.
proud right now. Yeah, that's really good.
Slowly but surely.
Well, this is where we say thank you.
Yes.
It was so nice to have you in our studio for a chat. And we know that all of our listeners are going to benefit from this as well.
Yeah.
We will put out some of our show notes onto our website, so researchworks.net. So please head over there to get some of those notes and a bit of a link over to CAHS bio as well at Telethon Kids Institute. And if you want to keep this as part of a record of your CPD requirements, there's a form there that you can fill out as well, just to make sure you keep a track of your hours.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But for now, we have to say thank you, Kath, for your time today. And thank you to everyone for listening.
Yeah.
And we hope you will continue listening for the rest of season 4.
It's going to be a goodie. All right, talk to you all again really soon. Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Bye.